Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think fixing our workplace can fix our world, we got a real treat for you today. We're talking about workplace investigation failures, something near and dear to all of our heart. We're gonna be talking about the biggest mistakes you can make. We have a phenomenal group. And as we get started here, I want you to drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. We are not connecting with enough of each other. We have to continue to grow this network. We have to continue to increase the nodes in our network. Your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. So drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat and also drop in at least where you're coming from today. We're going to be running through a couple of quick announcements. So the first announcement is, of course, if you're here for credits, this is the place to be every single week, twice a week. In most cases. So if it's HRCI or CCB or SHRM, this is the place to get some credits to stay up to date on all of your certifications. And this is also the place to be to get more thought leadership. So you can come to these webinars every week. You can watch them on your ride home on YouTube. And you can also check out a lot of these other pieces of thought leadership that are continually coming out. The Ethical Machines podcast, the Two Gurus Talk Compliance. There's tons of podcasts on the Compliance Podcast Network that you should be tuned into. You also should be tuned into this book. AI is ripping through our organizations, creating myriad new risks because there's so many use cases that aren't even rising to our eyes. We don't even know what's going on. So if you have not checked out this book by the one and only Reed Blackman, you absolutely should. And if you don't, if you're pinching pennies or you're just a cheapo like me, stay super active in the chat, ask some great questions, and you are going to win one of 5 copies we're going to be giving out. Last Tuesday, we had a great session with the one and only Leslie Bowles talking about the healthcare benchmark report. So if you are a healthcare compliance officer, definitely want to download that and definitely watch the replay on our YouTube channel that you, of course, should like and subscribe, share with all of your friends. But download either the healthcare one if you're in healthcare or the general one if you're in other industries to see a bunch of tips and a bunch of great perspectives on how you can improve your program. Remember, our job is to make better bets with our time. It's hard to do that if we're just putting one foot in front of the other, because what got us here is probably not going to get us there. We need to elevate our function inside of our organizations to be that true strategic lever that de-risks the company and adds more enterprise value. Speaking of adding enterprise value, how can anybody know what they're supposed to do unless they understand your policies? So policy management has been a big pain point for a lot of compliance programs. They're using tools that in 2010 were phenomenal, were brand new, but maybe haven't been updated. Maybe you're in SharePoint and you're doing a bunch of things manually. Policy Plus is the answer for that. We have a bunch of great features informed by people on the front lines like you. We are up to a lot of emojis right now, almost at 1,000. We're going to break a new record today. I got a good feeling about it. If you're interested in learning some more, listen to the round of applause. Phenomenal. Okay. When you hear that, that means let's blast some more emojis on the screen because none of us have had lunch yet. I'm going to give you, look at that. We are going to give you a little commercial about Policy Plus. If you'd like to learn some more for no pitch zone demo, definitely let us know either on the website or drop a 1 in the chat. And here it comes.
Your policy program has a lot of moving parts. Ethico keeps them all in view. Every approval, every attestation, every deadline in one dashboard. Start a new policy, and before you type a word, Ethico checks whether it already exists. Build it your way. Upload, write, link, or choose from a template library. Define your properties or let AI autofill to save you time. It reads your document and suggests the metadata for you. One click to save, straight to your policy library, a single source of truth for all your internal documents. Find anything instantly, even if a keyword is buried deep inside a document. Keep it organized with custom categories and nested folders. Filter by anything, owner, department, status, and more. Ready for review? Send it. Reviewers are notified immediately. Configure your review process, set deadlines, and ensure nothing falls through the cracks. Every audit trail, version history, and acknowledgement report is ready for you to export the moment you need it. One platform for every policy, every approval, every attestation. Ethico. Love your work.
Love your work and love that silky voice from the one and only Chase. Next week, we are going to be at the Compliance in the Age of AI conference. So if you're in the Boston area or want to come and vacation in early spring or late spring, I guess, in Boston. Use this code Ethico50 because we love you. Get 50% off admission. It's going to be a great conference, a lot of great speakers, a lot of great topics. And before I pass it over to the coolest guy in compliance, one of my favorite people in the world, Matt Kelly, I want you to also know that next Tuesday, we are back with the Ethico MBA. So the series that we kicked off, we've been doing several sessions. We have another session next Tuesday. You're not going to want to miss it. We're going to be talking about how do we better connect compliance to corporate strategy. So if you've missed those, check us out on the YouTube channel. Those replays are there available. But definitely want to come live on how you can get an MBA. Who doesn't want some more letters on the end of their name? And then next Thursday, we're going to be talking about risk-based investigations. Okay, as I pass it over to Matt Kelly, open up a new tab. And definitely subscribe to the Radical Compliance blog. This blog is phenomenal. Matt Kelly is probably the smartest guy I know. There, I said it. How's it going, Matt? Welcome.
Going very well, Nick. Thank you for those very kind words. I don't pay Nick to tell you all that about my blog. It just pours
out of me, Matt. It just comes from my heart, you know?
Thank you very much. So I'm happy to take it from here. And hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us all today. As Nick said at the top of the hour, we are here today to talk about investigations and kind of balancing how to do them well by looking at how you might accidentally do them poorly. What are mistakes in investigation practices? What are the consequences of that? How do you avoid them? We have a lot that we could cover here, as I am sure many people know. And we do have three great speakers with us to give us sort of a comprehensive look at what investigation challenges are out there and how you can avoid them. First, I will just go down the row here on my lineup. We have Jake Sullivan. He is the Global Compliance Director for Karl Storz, medical device company. And Jake is based here in Boston with me. Jake, thanks for being with us. Oh, are you there, Jake?
Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. Also joining us from Mexico, and it's always nice to have an international perspective on Ethicsverse, Carolina de Luna Ponce, who is compliance leader for Aleatica. I think I am pronouncing that correctly, which is the Toll and Highway Administration in Mexico City. Carolina, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. Really nice to be here.
And then last but not least, we have Kevin Brenner, who is a former compliance professional himself in-house. He is also these days special counsel at Global Link Law and is more of an independent investigation type who can help other companies. And Kevin has been there and done that with a lot of different investigations, giving us sort of a consultant perspective. Kevin, thank you for joining us as well.
Thanks. Great to be here.
And then, as always, for all of you listeners, if you have particular questions that you'd want me to put to our audience, you can put them in the attendee chat or the Q&A function at any time. If you have comments about investigation advice you may have learned the hard way yourself or best practices you try to follow, you can also put those in the attendee chat. Try and make this a very interactive discussion. And we are just looking for the best experience for the listeners. So the more you tell us what's on your mind, the better it is, and the more that we will embrace that. I'm going to start with sort of an open-ended question here. I will ask each of you, what do you see as either the most common mistake in internal investigations or maybe the most dangerous mistake that could happen? Those are not necessarily the same thing, but either the most common thing or the biggest, worst mistake. What is that? Why do you think that is? Jake, I'll start with you, and then Carolina, and then Kevin, but what's on your mind there? What would you say?
Thanks, Matt. So for us, the investigations team, it's part of the compliance team overall. And we've worked really hard to move from a culture of fear of compliance to being more of a business enabling function with an open door policy. So I think the biggest mistake our investigators can make is kind of feeding into the fear culture by giving the interviewees a bad experience during the process. And the vast majority of our interview subjects, they're not going to be terminated as a result of the investigation. They're still going to continue to work with us. So we want to make sure the process is as painless as possible for them and kind of try to eliminate fear and anxiety as much as possible by kind of making sure that at the beginning, we're making a solid connection with them when we're building rapport, kind of clearly stating the purpose of the interview, asking open-ended questions and then drilling down to the details instead of trying to have gotcha questions or asking leading questions, not interrupting them when they're speaking. And during the interview, we want to give them a chance to kind of vent about pain points in the process, express frustrations, because this can help us lead to process improvements. And then at the end of the interview, we want to make sure that the next steps are clear so they're not leaving the call with anxiety. So I've kind of seen it go bad when these things aren't followed, and an interview can lead to confusion and frustration, and then people can talk and it can kind of damage the reputation of the department, which we're really trying to be a positive business enabling function.
All right. So Carolina, what would you say then? Jake had a lot about in the specific interviews with specific people. So do you think in those terms? Do you have other risks that you're worried, concerns keeping on your mind? What do you say?
Great. I don't think that I have a delay. Let me know if you hear me correctly.
You're good.
Okay, excellent. Well, so I think that my point was going to say same things as Jake. I do think that there is this not delimiting the scope of an investigation, the common mistake on investigations. I think that sometimes one investigator from the compliance team is handling several cases at the same time. So then the problem is when you want to do all these several investigations without delimiting the scope and writing your investigation plan and following it. So I think that the common mistake is not being organized in the investigations, because that's the first step. And if you are not organized, then you will start to not knowing which next step you have to follow, and that compromise the whole investigation. I do think that depending on the type of work you do, some investigators, like in my case, I do handle like 20, 30 investigation at the same time. And that's why organization is my priority. And some other investigators do have one big investigation in the, just not more. So depending on on what you are doing and how is your work. But for me is that I did have these mistakes before. And well, yeah, not clear scope. And I think that the most dangerous, not common, but the most dangerous one is like when an investigator don't know how to investigate. And just because you are from the compliance team, then they give you the responsibility for handle an investigation. And if you are not professional on that, or you don't have background on that, then that will be a really dangerous mistake. And I have seen in the practice that is very common, like, oh, you are in compliance, then do an investigation. So that's my first intake.
All right. And Kevin, give us your thoughts, because now Carolina just outlined a half a dozen process sort of risks and concerns, and Jake was talking about specific in the interview room, how things can go wrong. But what would you say based on what you've seen in investigations you've done? Like, what's the worst way that somebody could mishandle something?
Yeah, I mean, these are all great thoughts, and there are so many ways that things can go sideways quickly. The things that really popped into my mind are, number one, premature separation. So, and this happens frequently when business units get involved in investigations. They find a problem, they want to show that they care, they want to show that they acted quickly. They separate employees before an appropriate interview has been handled. And now you've created potentially a whistleblower, and you have somebody that you probably won't be able to talk to again. Mm-hmm. So that's not good. Blowing attorney-client privilege is something that I've seen happen with some frequency. And, you know, not every investigation needs an attorney, but lots do. And if you start an investigation and you're not under privilege, and there's not an attorney involved, and you're doing interviews and you're getting information, that is not going to be privileged later on when you loop in an attorney. So sometimes what companies do is they'll start a non-privileged investigation. They'll get to a certain point. They'll realize, oh, we have a problem here. We need to bring in legal. And now at that point, you have a record up to that point that isn't privileged. And who knows what sort of communications it's generated. So those are probably the big ones. The other thing, of course, is spoliation, document destruction. I think in today's world where there's a lot of automatic processes, particularly with email and even with like Slack and other of those sort of platforms, it's harder to actually purposefully engage in spoliation, but it's not impossible. Mm-hmm. And so a related point would be issuing legal holds, document preservation notices at the appropriate time. So those are, I guess, my initial thoughts.
So, Nick, give me any of your thoughts that you have here. I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on the attendee chat, which has blown up with great advice and great observations. But one thing I'm struck by is Jake's original comment that you don't want to come across as the enemy. And a lot of times you're not firing somebody. They're still going to be employed at the end of the ordeal. And it's, yet again, it is about getting people to trust that compliance is not the enemy. They are here to help you. We have talked about that probably every single Ethicsverse I've ever been on, and here we are again. But like, what jumps out at you that compliance officers need to think about, Nick? Yep. Are you there, Nick? You might be on mute. Your audio's out. Yep. Nick, we can't hear you. I am going to let Nick and Joa try and troubleshoot the audio behind the scenes. No worries. But, I'm going to actually step back and try and tie together what Jake, Kevin, and Carolina, what you've all hinted at in one form or another is the compliance team needs some sort of disciplined structure to do investigations, whether that is so you can juggle 20 of them at once, or you can walk through an actual process and not start an investigation without an attorney client and make sure that they're brought in, or make sure.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you are, Nick. All right.
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Great points made by everybody. I was combing through the chat to see which comment I could steal. But I think the biggest one that maybe wasn't mentioned is this concept of like motivated reasoning. We as human beings are all kind of wired with these cognitive errors or these cognitive these sort of things that like we all have to fight against. And motivated reasoning is really this kind of unconscious tendency that we have to, process information, construct arguments in ways that kind of, arrive at our preferred conclusion. And so I think when we kind of come into an investigation and we think we already know the answer, that turns less in, that moves from being kind of a fact-finding exercise to really more of like an argument or like a sales pitch or kind of gathering information that's going to corroborate our predetermined, quote unquote, conclusion. And I think that can lead to us kind of closing cases too quickly or not looking under enough rocks and not, finding the things that we might need to find in order to see something systemic in the organization, which kind of to bring that home can lead to some headwinds for us being that helpful, function inside the organization that is really kind of an assistant business function. Sorry for those technical issues, but that's what I'd add. All
right. Fair enough. You sound perfectly clear and normal now. But I wanted to sort of pick up on what I had said before. This will first be a polling question for the audience. Yes or no? Do you have sort of a dedicated structure for how you do investigations, how you manage investigations? Do you have one? Do you not have one? But Kevin, I'll start with you and then go back to Jake and Carolina. What should your investigation function or structure, your process, like what should that do? What should that walk you through so that you don't mishandle an investigation?
Yeah, so this is, I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all answer, because companies of different sizes, different business types, different regulatory risk may have different needs.
Mm-hmm.
So I caveat my answer with that, because like large, like healthcare organizations are going to need a really robust top of the line investigations practice. They're going to probably need some sort of system like NAVEX or something to intake things. A smaller company, a growing company may need something that's less robust. But I think regardless of where you're at in your journey as a company, you need to have a way of triaging complaints when they come in. I mean, at the bare minimum, right? You have to have a plan for, well, first of all, there has to be an outlet for complaints to go, right? There should be a reporting mechanism. Again, does that need to be NAVEX or something comparable? And I'm not trying to plug NAVEX. I know there's other companies out there, but I know they're one of the big ones. No, but there needs to be a reporting mechanism that the employees are familiar with, and that if they're not familiar with, it's their own fault, because they've been given, numerous communications enlightening them to what it is. But there needs to be a clear reporting mechanism. And then there needs to be a triaging system of some sort that says, when a complaint comes in, this is what happens. And a key part of that, I mean, the most crucial part of that, is assigning the complaint to a competent investigator. I know there was a comment before by one of the panelists about, the wrong person handling the wrong investigation. That is a recipe for disaster. Mm-hmm. We never want that to happen. But to my point before, not every investigation needs to be handled under privilege. Not every investigation needs to be handled, and different companies have different ways of separating out. Like in some organizations, HR or employee relations will handle certain investigations. A dedicated investigations team, perhaps operating under legal or compliance, will handle others. I just think there needs to be a very clear, understood system for the complaints to come in and be designated to one of those different teams. So that's like the starting point, I would say.
All right. Jake, let me put that sort of question to you then. I don't know if you want to talk about a specific process that you and your team follow, or just the idea of, because I agree with what Kevin said, you have to make sure that the investigation gets assigned to the right person. So you sort of have to understand what the matter is. But how do you, at Karl Storz or elsewhere you've been, how do you think through evaluating the thing? Once it's come in through the intake, here it is on our desk. Somebody has to decide it's going to go here to HR, there to legal, it's going to stay with compliance. How do you figure that out?
Yeah, I think having the structured process is super important. So once we have an issue come into our system, we use NAVEX. We actually have an investigations policy, and the business is actually trained on it. So it kind of outlines the steps. So it's not only great internally that we have a process that we can follow, but it's very transparent. So the business knows that we are following this process. We also have a discipline policy, which helps the business know that, hey, that matter is going to be handled consistently and fairly, and we have kind of some criteria that's set up. And one of the processes that we have that I think has been most successful is we have an investigations review committee. So whenever there is an investigation where there's potential corrective action, we set up a committee meeting where we have compliance, legal, HR, and then the business, and we go through the report and we talk out any of the observations, and then we will collectively agree on what the corrective action should be. So it puts a lot of transparency in the process. It allows everyone to ask questions and kind of feel good about what the next steps are going to be. Yeah. So I think having kind of the transparent process around investigations, it's super important, and it's made it more of a collaborative process than a kind of okay, we're handing down this discipline, you have to do it.
But so let me just clarify, the investigation process that you have, how transparent is it? Do you train employees on here's what to expect if there's an investigation, or is it just visible that they could understand here's what would normally happen? It's a good point. It's a good idea. How much do they get to understand what the investigations look like in the abstract?
So there's a certain population of employees that have the policy assigned to them. as a reading sign. So they will go through it, and it is available to everyone. So it's kind of the employees that are in scope to receive the other healthcare compliance policies will also receive the investigations policy.
Okay.
So a lot of customer-facing individuals.
That actually would be another question I'll throw out there to the attendees as well. To what extent do you share what the investigation process normally is so people can understand this is normally how it would unfold? I can trust that this is the process. I mean, it's a good idea to be transparent. Carolina, I wanted to ask you a bit more about how you structure multiple investigations happening at the same time. You said 20 or 30. Somebody was already asking, how on earth do you juggle 20 or 30 at once? But how do you try? What's the process to keep those on track? Or what happens if some big thing suddenly blows up and it's going to occupy a lot of your time? Like, how do you try and coordinate all of the multiple investigations that happen at once? What's that like?
Totally, it's very complicated. I took time to organize when I took the position, and it they told me like the biggest challenge is handling multiple investigations. It's important to mention that these investigations, some of them are like low risk or are day-to-day matters, which do not require a big investigation. And some of them do require a broad investigation. So that's why organization is like my main principle for this. So I do say, okay, for this, I need this and this. For this, I need help of HR. For this, I need help of safety. And it's a lot of daily organization. I do think that the problem is that it can be a snowball if you like download the word. So we've been in the company, we've been trying to figure it out the best way to handle it. Maybe it is needed. We are just like in that point, like maybe it is needed a person full dedicated to investigations and not doing other compliance matter. Maybe this person will need to be the one overseeing the investigations, because right now in a company with a lot of employees with limited resources, which I don't think that many of you can have this problem where you have limited resources in compliance. And yeah, if you download the word one day or for a week, then you start to having a snowball, and you need to have like, okay, in my investigation protocol, I do have some days for, I don't know, 60 days, 90 days for completing an investigation. And as soon as the deadline is coming and you haven't finished the investigation, well, then look for an exception, like with the global compliance or with the committee, like, okay, I do need an exception in the term of this investigation. So like being very transparent on the phases of investigation you have, like if you are on the deadline of some, and yeah, follow up with some graphics and see, okay, these 20 are in final investigation or step, or we are delayed on the interviews. So basically tracking and using systems to track it.
Nick, I can't help but think a lot of what we're talking about right now, and a lot of what I see in the chat as well, is all about transparency as much as possible, especially at the beginning, disclosing how investigation processes would typically work, telling people this is the scope of our investigation and whatnot. More like if you can convince people to trust the compliance team at that early juncture, suddenly a whole lot of what I thought we'd be talking about, all the mistakes, like they either go away or they get a whole lot easier to manage on the fly as they happen. But I mean, I guess, like I said before, yet again, I'm struck that this really comes down to being transparent and showing employees they can trust you. Suddenly all these other stuff we talk about, it gets easier. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's a lot of work you can do prior to somebody being a part of an investigation. So if they're a party to an investigation, they're being investigated, they're somebody who's getting interviewed, there's communication that should be going out to give them some picture of what they should expect. And if they can see that kind of prior to being pulled into something, that's great. Separately, I think letting whistleblowers know what that process looks like, what they could come to expect and so forth. Again, that's from communication. That's from an FAQ page. Can do a lot to kind of pave the way, not only for more risk intelligence, but sort of a higher quality of risk intelligence. Just to zoom out of it though, I mean, the topic of the webinar is what are the biggest mistakes that we make in investigations? And, we're kind of touching on them. If I can sort of sum it up from like a bird's eye view, I think it's the failure to not look at this whole thing as a business process. So quality in any business process, I mean, you can use an analogy of like a manufacturing setting, is like a low standard deviation of around quality on the output, right? Many times in an investigation process, it's not managed along the way. There's a lot of people like reinventing the wheel, doing investigations their way. If you're over an investigation, like some more standardization leads to sort of more consistent output, right, of any business process. And I think when we start to look at it as a business process, well, then we can enforce those standards by leveraging our technology, by leveraging our platforms, making sure that we have the right, templates for the, certain categories, have certain questions that every investigation should be asked. There's certain data points that we would want to make sure are contained within our case management system, so we don't have that garbage in, garbage out problem. Proper approvals to close a case. Many times cases are closed and you don't find that there's errors in the case until you're pulling your quarterly reports together. So the more we can do to kind of pull quality forward in that process and drive more standardization, I think that leads to much higher quality outputs on the back end. And you start to kind of de-risk the interaction points that stakeholders have with an investigation, either as a whistleblower, like I said before, or as a party to an investigation as a subject or whatever.
All right. I agree with all of that. In the interest of time, I'm going to try and shift gears a little bit to more of the tactical stuff that happens in investigations and what the big risks are. I guess one question I have, maybe two, I'll try and shoehorn them in, is big mistakes you could make are failure to implement a litigation hold at the right time and failure to keep a investigation confidential. And I guess my question is just, how does that go wrong? Kevin, I'll put it to you first, and then to Jake, and then to Carolina. But in your observation, like, I don't know, these are block and tackle things you have to get right. They don't go right. Like, why not?
Well, I mean, the confidentiality piece, it's hard because people talk, right? And the larger your investigation gets, the more people, the more witnesses there are, the more implicated employees there are, the more interviews that are conducted, it becomes more likely that your operational security is going to be impacted and that the confidentiality is going to be breached. The other problem is, I mean, there's never strict confidentiality in an internal investigation, right? Because if you're in the compliance team, you're reporting to somebody, right? So you do an interview, so you can't say to an employee, well, this is entirely confidential, because the reality is you're going to be reporting what that person said up the chain. So there's limited confidentiality. That sometimes is a hard message to relay to people. I find it's helpful to be candid about it, right? We don't need to get into upjohn warnings here, but if you're giving an upjohn warning, that's always a good time to talk about confidentiality. But regardless of if you're doing an upjohn or not, you want to be candid with the witness or the implicated person, whoever it is that you're interviewing, that you are going to keep this as confidential as you can. You're requesting that the employee, the witness, whoever, not disclose that they keep it confidential, and that the only breach in confidentiality that's going to be flowing from your side is the reality that you have an obligation by your position to report certain things up the chain, and if ever there's a need, to third parties like regulators, or as part of a litigation proceeding, God forbid if there is one. So I don't know. It's the litigation hold. That should just be initiated as a matter of course, really at the outset of any investigation where you think there's litigation or regulatory risk. There's no hold. There's no harm in issuing the hold prematurely. but there could be a lot of problem issuing it too late. And so for me, I would always err on the side of just issuing it prematurely. Now, I know that the process itself, getting back to like blocking and tackling, in some companies, issuing a litigation hold is just a matter of maybe a paralegal or somebody just flipping a switch and it goes out. You give an email list, it goes out. And in other companies, it's much more difficult. I've worked in both types of companies. And so I know that it can be somewhat of a laborious process depending on what your process is. But again, unfortunately, I just think it's an important step in the process, and you're better off doing it, again, anytime that you have a reason to believe that this investigation could result in some sort of regulatory or litigation matter.
Jake, what would you say to either issue, imposing a litigation hold at the appropriate time with the appropriate scope, or how does that go wrong? Loss of confidentiality, how can that be mishandled? What happens if it does? Things like that. But, what do you think about to try and make sure those things get right and they don't go wrong?
Yeah, I think sometimes where it goes wrong is where you have an investigation where at the beginning it looks like it's kind of a low risk routine matter, and then when we're doing our interviews, when we're doing our document review, we realize that it might be a lot more high risk than we originally thought, and we kind of need to loop legal in, and we need to put it under privilege. We need to get a hold going. So I think a way to kind of prevent that is to make sure your investigators are trained in what issues to look out for, to make sure that we're not losing privilege and creating some discoverable documentation. I think going to the confidentiality piece, when we lose confidentiality and people are aware that the investigation is going on, that can just lead to so many issues. People might not be truthful in their interviews because they might be fearful of retaliation. There can be management kind of pushing a narrative. They can be coaching people, getting people to align on their stories. It can have just morale impact. It might disrupt operations because people are kind of distracted by the investigation that's going on. So I think it's so important to make sure we're trying to keep it as confidential as we can. Like Kevin said, it can be difficult, but it can spiral if that's not kept.
Well, I could just add one point though to that too. There's a relationship too between the litigation hold and confidentiality, because the litigation hold is going to be broader probably than the number of witnesses that you are going to need to interview as part of the investigation. So, for example, you need to send a litigation hold to people in IT or HR and different groups who really aren't like direct witnesses. And those people are, if they don't have the context at all or any understanding as to why they're receiving the hold, they're going to start asking questions immediately, because it's especially if they haven't received one before, it's sort of a jarring thing to receive from the legal team, right? It's like, what is this? Why did I get this? So just a word of advice would be, give folks a heads up if you're going to be issuing them a legal hold. You don't have to get into all the details as to why, because of confidentiality, but to help maintain confidentiality, I think it's helpful to give that heads up and just say, hey, this is a legal hold. Just file the instructions. Really can't get into any specifics at this time. Please don't discuss it, et cetera.
Well, so that leads me to another question I wanted to ask. Carolina, I'll start with you, and then if anybody else has it. We're talking so much about investigations that we're trying to keep confidential. What happens at the opposite end when who knows about it? Everybody in the company already knows this is a thing. And what new pressures that might bring to you doing a good investigation when everybody knows already? Are they trying to get their story straight? Are managers leaning on employees and whatnot? And how do you try and keep an investigation going under that circumstance? Carolina, I don't know if you've encountered that or if you'd have advice about how to get through a high pressure situation like that, but and then Jake and Kevin as well. But what's it like under that circumstance?
Okay, yeah, I do think that I do have a fresh case that happened to me about labor harassment. That the investigation started to spread because we have a long list of witnesses, and also we had a lot of it claims a lot of reports about this harassment. So it was not confidential at all, because I mean, if there were, I'm going to put like examples, if there were 10 employees in that department, 6 of them had already submitted a report. So of course, since the beginning, you have this problem where confidentiality, the breach of confidentiality, it's imminent. So we need to handle that investigation with a special focus on how we are doing interviews, how we are gathering all the information, but it's like sitting down with the team and see, okay, what we are going to do in this special case. Like, you cannot do the same things that you normally do for the investigations, but see the whole context. And sometimes you will need help of HR or another department, people and culture, I don't know, to do some preventive measures. In this case, we sent some of the employees to home office, but we needed to agree with other departments because it was a special case. So I do think that it compromises the whole investigation, but you need to know how to handle that situation. And sometimes also you need external help, an external counsel. And well, the other point that I was going to say before is that it's very important the disclaimers you do for the interviews. And in Mexico, we have different rules and different regulation about the option warning, the privilege, attorney-client privilege briefing. So we do not have this regulation as in United States. So we do have other disclaimers that goes with confidentiality and not retaliation policy, but not as not. I just wanted to say that because in some of the attendant chat, I saw that if you are not a lawyer, you have to do the option warning. I just wanted to say that in Mexico, we don't do the option warning because we are not lawyers from United States, so we are not subjected to that, even though some of the companies may have some equity from the US. But that was a side comment just for the attendant chat.
Here's a good question. We have a ton of audience questions, so I'm going to skip some of my other questions I had pre-drafted and just go to them. But somebody is asking, how do you prevent retaliation following an investigation when it is unsubstantiated and then the employee continues to work in the same environment? Jake, let me put that to you, since you had originally raised the idea that most people, after an investigation, they're still there, and you still have to work with them, and their coworkers still have to work with them, and there could be retaliation. How do you try and juggle that, or communicate it, or protect people, or how do you wrap things up at the end?
That's a great question. So I think it's really important to just let the employee know that it's clear that we have a strong non-retaliation policy, that retaliation won't be tolerated, and retaliation in itself is its own matter that will be looked into. So if they have any sort of, and I don't even want to say evidence of retaliation, it's just more so if they even feel they're being retaliated against, follow up with us, it'll be looked into, and it's something that the company is not going to deal with. We're just making it clear to them we do have that open door policy, follow up with us with any issues.
All right. Another question from the audience here is, I see this one a lot. Should compliance officers put recommendations on disciplinary action in their investigation report? And I don't know. I've had different people tell me different schools of thought on that. But Kevin, let me put that question to you first, and then maybe Carolina and Jake. But when you're writing up a final report, do you include recommended or potential disciplinary actions as part of it, or do you let somebody else handle that? Kevin, what would you say?
Yeah, so the furthest I would go, I mean, generally I would say no, okay? The furthest I would go, though, is because I don't think in internal investigations, the job of an investigator is to find the facts, okay? You don't want it to look like that you have an axe to grind. And really, I think ideally, the disciplinary decision should be made by a combination of HR and the business team, the people that manage the employee and human resources. That's really their roles, is to make those sort of decisions. Where I think the investigation team comes in, though, is to say, what is precedent? Okay, in prior similar cases, what disciplinary results were there? If you have that, so let's say there's some sort of harassment case, and over the last 2 years there have been a handful of similar cases. It's important that the team that's making the disciplinary decision is aware of what those cases were and how they were decided, because you need to have consistency. If you don't have consistency in your discipline, that's going to come back to hurt you when the discipline terminated whatever employee brings a retaliation suit or some sort of wrongful separation suit against the company. Then there's discovery, and lo and behold, these other employees did similar things. They weren't let go. That's going to support the employee's case that you were actually out to get him and had an axe to grind and so on and so forth.
Okay. Jake or Carolina, do you have views or do you have policies at your companies about, do you put recommended disciplinary action in an investigation report, or is that a separate process other people handle? But Jake, what do you do? Carolina, what would you say?
So we do put in the report, we put the recommended corrective action per the discipline policy, and then we align on it in our investigation review committee meetings. And we kind of go around and everyone will make their recommendation. And there are times where, as a result of the meeting, the corrective action is lower than it was originally proposed in the report. And there are times where it was higher than it was originally proposed. So we try to make it a collaborative process. So ultimately everyone feels as good as they can about what the corrective action is going to be. If there ever is we can't agree on it, there is a tiebreaker who's kind of the head of legal. The global head of legal would be the tiebreaker. But it's never actually come to that in any of our investigations. We've been able to come to an agreement each time.
Carolina, what's your stance on this question?
We do put the recommendations on the investigation report, but for some recommendations, we do talk about them in the disciplinary committee. So it is like the investigation committee, but only for disciplinary measurements, maybe the termination of the contract, or maybe, I don't know, reducing the bonus for the people. So I do think that compliance do the recommendation for the disciplinary action, but some of them have to be raised to a committee because it is important to align it with the HR and legal team if it's possible. If not, to avoid giving a recommendation that cannot be recommend a disciplinary action that cannot be implemented. So because there you lost the enforcement you have as compliance for investigation. So it has to be this dual responsibility for a committee and compliance. And also what I have experienced is that if there is like your investigation report is extremely fundamented, there is the evidence clear, then the operation people, the ones that have to take the decision, like, okay, fine, we do terminate with that person, they will not say no because they have all the evidence really well presented there. So I do think that that's my intake for this.
Here's a good point. And Nick, maybe I'll bounce this idea off you and what you think. But Mia, who is saying the biggest mistake in investigations is the expectation that this investigation can't be longer than 30 days, 60 days, 90 days.
Right.
And you actually have like a service level agreement with the rest of the enterprise. We're going to get this thing, we'll get to the bottom of it in this fixed time. And that can create pressure to do a slapdash thing or rush through it or whatnot. And I agree with what Mia says. It's just sort of that compliance needs to communicate to everybody, we're going to do a thorough job. It will take as long as it takes and not a day more or a day less.
Right.
That's nice in theory. I'm willing to bet that's really hard to make that stick in practice. But what do you think about that point?
Well, that's kind of like Goodhart's law in practice. I mentioned that in a comment. Goodhart's law says that when a measure becomes the target, it ceases to be a good measure. So like that's a standard, that's a target. 30 days is, a fine standard, for an average. But to your point, if that ends up becoming what you're solving for, well, then you're going to leave a lot of, proper investigative work, on the table, and you're going to be solving for some number instead of solving for completeness or quality in that, in that business process that's going to change, depending on the complexity of it and so forth. Investigations, I talked about that sort of business process thing. That does not mean that every single step, kind of to your point or to that comment from Mia, it doesn't mean that every step will take the same amount of time. Perhaps triage takes the same amount of time. Perhaps you can standardize that and really lock down that particular step. But there's other things that, are going to balloon out depending on, the situation. So we all like a checklist. We all like a guide and a recipe and so forth. Sometimes it's hard when you're cooking something and it says put a pinch of salt in. It's like, well, how much is that? These are just kind of guides and standards that can help us to kind of have a North Star that we're trying to solve for. But to your point, we have to balance that against like what the realities are for any particular investigation, which again, I think can come from or like the realities of this process need to be communicated to other people in the organization, whether they're part of it yet, or on the front end or on the back end, or if they're intersecting with that investigation. I think our job is to provide context to the broad organization in many different respects. And with respect to an investigation, we have to be able to manage those expectations, based on the experiences we had and so forth.
A couple of people were asking us for more advice about when you can or should not separate an employee. And I could easily imagine a local manager who fires somebody on the spot thinking, well, haven't I done something great for the company? So what then? Does the compliance officer call the person up and say, no, you're not fired? Because that's a big warning sign to them that, they're in deep trouble and maybe they could have a complaint against the company or something like that. But people are just asking, should you have a policy? How much discretion should that policy be? I mean, if somebody is beating up employees in the break room, that sounds like a good excuse to say you're fired as opposed to you're suspended without pay. I don't know. Kevin, I think you had mentioned this idea before. This is a big risk. How should companies handle it? And should it be something as structured as we have a policy and we're going to train everybody that thou shalt not fire someone on the spot? Is it something else? Like, how does that work in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think lots of companies have disciplinary guidelines so that there is some consistency in practice. I think that that's really helpful, but those guidelines have to they have to allow for some flexibility. The reality is that, two employees could engage in similar conduct And the business may very well want one employee to be separated and another employee not to be separated based on their respective performance or other considerations. And the question arises, well, when is it okay to separate the one and not the other? And I think that's the sort of those policies, and I've seen so many of these different disciplinary guideline policies, and they're all very different, and they all try to address that situation, because the reality is certain folks within the business are going to be more ethically minded than others. There are going to be certain folks in the business that are like, I don't care what this person did. I don't want this person separated because they're so important for this reason or another reason. There's also going to be leaders that are like, look, if they stole in any way, shape, or form, they're gone. If there's a violation of trust, they're gone. I would say that and some companies have insurance policies that address this. Like, I know I worked at a company that had a bondability policy that basically said, if you are an employee who engaged in some act of deception or dishonesty, then you're not bondable under our insurance policy, which means it's immediate separation. So there's no trust in you anymore. I think trust is a huge thing. I think when there's a violation of trust and people have lied and been deceptive, it's easier to separate. I think the harder ones are where the substantiation of the allegation is premised on evidence that isn't necessarily crystal clear, right? We've all had those investigations where we think it's substantiated, that's our decision, but it's not overwhelming evidence, it's based on witness testimony, et cetera, et cetera. These are very hard decisions. I mean, and I don't know that in the 5 minutes we have left, we'll be able to get to a good answer on this. It's such a good question because it's such a hard thing to answer.
So we do have just a couple of more minutes left. I wanted to squeak in one more question that, Jake, I'll put to you first. That way back when I asked at the beginning of the hour, what are the big issues on listeners' minds and the big threats? They were all talking about bias in investigations, assumptions you're making that you might not even know about, and like blinkered thinking that trickles into the interview, and suddenly you might not even know that you're leading people off on a path that's not objective. I thought it was a good point, but you had talked a lot about how to make sure that interviews happen well. I was just wondering if you could take a minute, and probably all we have here, like, how do you make sure that you or your investigators aren't bringing subjective assumptions or thoughts into the interview room that might suddenly, skewer what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so the one thing we do is we have regular role-playing sessions where we'll look at a case that came in, and on the team, like one of us will be the subject or one of us will be a witness, and we'll kind of do a mock interview and go through the different issues. And then we can kind of debrief and say, hey, this may have been a little bit leading, or maybe we want to take a different approach here. Maybe we want to start with this and then ask this later. So we kind of really just practice before the game, so it goes smoother when it counts. So that's probably the big way that we address that, and just kind of consistent training and practice.
All right. And
yeah,
then,
I mean, you have to have some mechanism to transfer the pattern recognition to drive consistency across investigators. So that's a great way to do it. Postmortems at the end of an investigation, just, to make sure that like the same sort of thinking, the same logic, the same sort of standard or quote unquote burden of proof is like applied across, substantiation, determinations and so forth. Like, we have to have a way to prevent everybody from like reinventing the own wheel and putting their own spin on, the execution of an investigation. One other point I want to make here, which I think is important, is to recognize that like, while someone might do the, the intake, and somebody else might do the investigation, and then somebody else might make the, disciplinary action determination, all that is viewed in the stakeholders' eyes as like one process. And we spend a lot of time sort of like talking about our commitment to transparency and our commitment to having a speak up culture and so forth. And the investigative process in many cases is like the demonstration of that. You know what I'm saying? It's like the performance of that thing. If you hear somebody is a great singer, you don't just sort of take everyone's word for it. At some point, you're going to come to your own conclusion based on the performance that you see of that person. And I think if we can look at this investigation as a kind of an actual intersection with stakeholders in the organization that we're always trying to influence, we can usually uncover some ways to really kind of optimize that process to reinforce these claims or kind of to demonstrate the culture that we're trying to, prove across the organization. So whether that's follow-up or thanking people for speaking up or making it easy for people to report or, trying to kind of see around the curve and anticipate the objections people might have, what steps can we build into our standardized process to follow up on retaliation? All those things can do a lot to really kind of be points of leverage to build these cultures that we want to talk about or that we're always talking about. Before we wrap up though, Kevin, I'm so sorry I skipped over this slide. Can you tell us a little bit about not good, bad acts, big costs, this event that you have going on?
Yeah, it's a newsletter on LinkedIn that I started recently, actually. The title Not Good is based off of an FBI agent I used to work closely with on cases. And anytime we uncovered really bad evidence that went way, he'd say, oh, this isn't good. This is not good. And what the newsletter is doing is just drilling down on pretty high, different high profile corporate misconduct episodes. The first one I did was about the McKinsey Purdue case that I think got a lot of attention a few years ago. But basically I'm doing like a weekly newsletter where I'm taking some sort of corporate catastrophic misconduct event and drilling down into like, what were the causes, what happened, what were the mistakes, what are the lessons learned, what should companies learn from this, what should they avoid, that sort of thing. So I think actually for like the group here and for what we've been talking about today, it might be really helpful. And I'm trying to make it entertaining too. So hopefully the reading's enjoyable.
All right, very good. So we dropped that link in the chat. So definitely follow the LinkedIn newsletter. Thank you all for coming. Let's get a massive emoji explosion for our guest. This is a phenomenal webinar. This could have, somebody said in the chat, this can go on, and we absolutely could have continued to talk because we've really only scratched the surface on this. So thank you all for coming. Please spread the word about the Ethicsverse. We want this to be a place that, this should be our spot every single week to come together and sharpen our sword, sharpen each other up, encourage each other, and so forth. So thank you guys all for coming. Definitely do not miss next Tuesday or you're not going to get your MBA, okay? Next Tuesday, we're going to be talking about how compliance can connect better to business strategy. Had a lot of great feedback about these MBA sessions, and we're going to keep those going. And like I said, we also have another great one next Thursday about risk-based investigation. So we are on an investigation kick around here. Love you all. See you next week. Take care.
See you guys. Thanks.